Welcome back, everybody, to episode 3 of the SQM Research podcast. We've got a bit of an interesting topic today. We thought we would go through distressed property listings. Now, distressed property listings are a topic that we at SQM hold pretty closely to our heart. We have a distressed property listings platform, um, but it's also spoken about a lot in the media. And I think there's quite a few misconceptions from discussions that I've had with clients and other people, Louis, about what a distressed property listing actually is and what are kind of the different types. So I thought today would be a good idea to kind of go through maybe some of those misconceptions, the way they're sort of perceived, and to talk a little bit about them potentially as an investment opportunity and kind of how they're affecting the market at the moment. So, Lou, do you want to start us off? What is a distressed property?
Yeah, sure, Sam. We regard a distressed property as a property where the evidence shows that the seller is very keen to sell, and they make it fairly clear in their listing why they want to sell. And so it'll often be a mortgagee in possession, but it can also be, for example, a deceased estate. It can be someone that's basically dramatically dropped the asking price because they need to sell yesterday for whatever reason. It can be someone that's moving overseas, and they need to move this property quickly. We're trying to, as part of our distressed properties report, capture all those type of listings. So it does go beyond just mortgagee in possession. And this is an important point because actually these days, doing a mortgagee in possession is about the very last thing a bank now wants to do. What they would generally do before they get to that very, very last resort is that they will put pressure on the borrower who's naturally struggling to make their repayments to sell the property.
Yeah.
And so often what we'll see in ads, it won't say, for example, mortgagee in possession, but might say bank for sale or forced sale or words to that effect. And so that does imply that potentially there is some value to be had.
And when we think about, the word distressed property, based on the definition that you've just given us, it's much more than what I think a lot of people would perceive it to be. I want to talk a little bit about, how sort of a lot of media kind of portray it versus how it actually is, because
Yeah, look, I think the media in the past have just thought it's just mortgagee in possession properties.
yeah,
But for the reasons I mentioned before, that the banks have been a little bit more subtle in terms of how they move these type of properties these days,
mm,
we believe it should be capturing more than just that.
yeah, absolutely. And are there sort of any specific indicators before a property gets to that distress stage that you might see, even if it's not explicitly marketed as distressed? So sometimes they might have it listed as distressed on the property, but are there any other signs that you could see that a property may be distressed if you're looking at individual listings?
Look, not really. We're going off the keywords in the listing. No question about that. Now, often you can see properties where the vendors really stuffed up their selling campaign. So when it was initially first advertised, the property may not have been distressed. Indeed, the vendor may well have put an asking price on the property well and truly above the market. But this is where a property like that can go from being just a normally advertised property to a distressed listing. The risk is for a vendor that if they put an asking price well and truly above the market, and it doesn't sell, and often they don't because they've mispriced it, then the property ends up what we call as turning stale. So in other words, property's been on the market, say 4, 5, 6 weeks, doesn't move because the asking price was too high. The vendors just missed out on their best chance to pick up a buyer in that first 4 weeks. And the problem is the longer the property is on the market for, the more would-be buyers start to think there's something wrong with the property. And so they start reducing their asking price. and they still can't move the property. And what we then often find is that properties have been on the market, say 7, 8, 9 months, heavily reduced, actually reduced below their fair value, and they're still not moving. That can happen as well. And I've seen time and time again in our distressed properties report such properties.
Yeah, fascinating. And that sort of kind of leads into my next question, which is what are usually the economic or personal factors that drive a property to be distressed?
It can be for a variety of reasons. So, for example, we see some properties being advertised because of divorcee sales.
Mm.
And so that's obviously their own circumstances as to why they're selling. It could be, as mentioned before, a situation where the bank's putting a lot of pressure on the borrower to sell their property to get out of their position. So there can be a variety of reasons why a property can be distressed, and the motivation behind the vendor can vary from, between seller to seller.
And look, from the SQM data, is there any particular geographical areas that tend to have a higher density of distressed property listings?
Yeah, there's one region that always is number one, the Gold Coast, Queensland's Gold Coast.
Really?
Right from the beginning, when I first put out this report, basically this subscription to Gold Coast has always been very concentrated in the distress listings report.
And what's the reason for that?
Oh, it's a good question. Having spent some time living on the Gold Coast myself as a younger fella, I can tell you it's a very transient area. There are people who come there to live thinking they've found paradise, only for a couple of years later to realize it's not paradise, and then they need to leave. So we do unfortunately see on the Gold Coast a high number of divorcee sales occur
Right.
in that area. I think too, it is a holiday location, and the problem historically has been on the Gold Coast is that getting to understand where fair value is on some of the stock that's up there can be more challenging, can be more difficult. And I have seen in the past many buyers overpay for property on the Gold Coast.
And look, how do broader economic indicators like inflation or interest rate movements do they translate to the number of distressed property listings on the market?
Yeah, so when we've seen housing market slowdowns or downturns, we generally do see a rise in the number of distressed listings. And in upturns, we see proportionally less distressed activity. Now, what drives upturns and downturns? Well, certainly the health of the economy is one factor. And the health of the economy can be driven by interest rate changes, of course.
Mm.
So if interest rates are too high, that can create more economic distress, which can lead to more distressed properties out there because people are not meeting their mortgage repayments, either because they've lost a job or the mortgage repayments are suddenly too high for them. On the flip side, when interest rates go super low, as what we had, for example, in 2021, distressed listings really can fall quite rapidly. And indeed, when you look at the historical charts we have on distressed listings, prior to COVID, there was, for example, nationwide some 13,000 distressed listings,
Mhm.
and that fell all the way down in 2021 down to about 6,000 distressed listings.
Wow. So cut more than half.
It cut by more than half. That's right. Then, if we're gonna talk about the trends, in 22, 23, distress listings started to rise again, probably as a result of the rise in interest rates that we had. In the last 12 months, they've actually flatlined, but we're still actually well below where we were prior to COVID. Still well below it. So,
Yeah.
there's actually, if I recall the numbers, we're around that 6,000 mark still.
So there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom of around the property market and sort of buying into these properties, and there's more distressed listings because people couldn't afford it with the cost of living. But from looking at that data, it's not always a direct impact. particularly on mortgages and that sort of stuff from what we've seen.
No, it's not always, and I think we also need to recall that back in COVID, the banks were being very easy going on borrowers who were struggling to meet their mortgage repayments at that time. So it probably was another reason why we did see a big fall in distressed listings. Um, so yeah, timing, the economy, it can all have a bearing on the counts that are out there.
And look, for potential buyers, because obviously we've had a number of clients that have come through to us looking at our distressed properties and looking to purchase
Yeah.
distressed properties, seeing sort of value in it. How quickly do a lot of these clients need to move?
Really good question. I'm glad you asked. Look, the truth is that those properties that are in our list that are bargains, they move pretty dang quick. And this goes to the point I've been trying to make for some time now. The housing market overall in Australia is actually becoming more and more efficient in terms of pricing. But the bargains are nevertheless there. So real bargains that I've been personally interested in when I've gone through the report, I've noticed like they're not there for long, 3 or 4 days, and they're gone.
So there's people really monitoring it and monitoring that market and purchasing it quickly. So, tip for viewers, move quickly if you look at our distressed property listing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you'll see if you subscribe, you'll see we actually list the ones which have just made the distress list, so you can see them. Like there's regular updates that we provide to our subscribers, so they can see new ones that come into the list pretty regularly.
And this is more, I guess, a question on top of this of the different categories of distressed properties, and we've mentioned a few. Is there one which typically has the most compelling buying opportunity where you get the most value?
You mean like property type or?
I'm more talking about distressed situation type. So whether it's a remortgaged property or whether it's a deceased estate, obviously the prices on those properties generally drop. Of those types, is there one that we typically see that is a
Yeah, two major types. So, when we firstly, forced sale.
yeah?
So we'll see in the ad, it says for sale, and they generally do seem to be a for sale, so they need to move quick. And then the one we referred to before, the stale properties, where they've been on the market for ages, the seller's really stuffed up their selling campaign. Everyone thinks there's something wrong with the property, when in truth, there's actually nothing wrong with the property. And then the seller's now going underneath fair value just to try and move it.
So tips for those out there, look for those 2 property types, and we do list them on the distressed property,
Yeah,
report.
we give a list of how long it's been advertised for, what the sales history's been, and so forth.
And look, that sort of leads me into my final question, which is, what's the key due diligence steps a buyer must undertake when they're looking at a distressed property? Because obviously,
Yeah.
as we've sort of spoken about, there may be concerns that there may be something wrong with the property. What is the steps that you would recommend a buyer take?
Yeah. Look, so our distress report's a guide to begin with. It's like what we're doing for everyone is saying, here is the universe that's out there. Here's some information such as the address and so forth. But we always encourage everyone to do their own due diligence, their own research when it comes to individual properties. So if I was going to go and look at buying a distressed property that was on the list, depending on the property type, I would certainly, number one, get an independent pest and quality report. Yeah, pest inspection quality report on it from either a builder or an expert that I've actually hired to go and check out the property. That's
Mm.
really important because there could actually be something wrong with it that the seller slash agent has not actually informed the market of. That's really important. If it's a unit, I would go so far as to get the body corporate minutes, find out what's going on with the common premises. That's really important as well. So definitely do those things. I would get a valuation report, which, as you know, we offer those in terms of price estimates. If it's a more unique property, potentially considering getting an on-site valuer to look at it as well. I think that would help too. So what else could be done in terms of your own due diligence on one of these potential distressed properties, or indeed any property that's out there for sale? Firstly, let's consider negotiation with the agent. So the property most likely is already being discounted. They may well likely be negotiable for further discount, but there'll always be a line in the sand for somebody, especially if they think they're already selling it on the cheap. Keep that in mind. I think that's important. The other thing too, and this is my personal take that I've had, is look, um, fighting over, negotiating over, say, $1,000 here or there. Like, is it worth losing the property that you really like over $1,000? I've seen it happen.
Mm.
Got to be careful about that. I'm not saying you're overpaid, no way, but the dabbling over minor dollars, I've seen negotiations fall apart over very, very minor dollars. And that can get a bit silly at times. And I think people end up regretting that.
It's interesting you say that. I actually
Yeah.
have my own anecdote of a story just like that. When we purchased our property, we literally won the property that it essentially passed in at auction because it went
Yeah.
under what the seller wanted. Um, and we actually won by offering $5,000 higher than what the other person could offer. So,
Yeah.
we're sort of talking pennies on the dollar
Yeah. Yeah.
comparative to the
I,
price of
I think
property.
when it comes to, for example, live auctions, it can get down to $1,000 bids. Fine. That's how it is. It's a live event. And if the agent's called it that, it's on the market,
This
it's
was
going to sell.
this was actually after the
Right.
auction.
Yeah.
So this was after the auction,
Yeah.
and they actually went back to the other buyer and said, "Do you want
Yeah.
to do this?" Because we came in after the auction,
Yeah.
and they said no, and it was over $5,000.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Yeah, that happens often. And look, I get it. Everybody's got their limits, and they generally need to stick to their limits. But I too often I see people who are penny pinching lose a property because of it, and also on the seller side as well. Losing a deal because over $1,000. It's probably not the smartest thing to do. Um, so yeah, going back to distressed listings, yes, the seller's most likely to be more negotiable, but everyone does have their line in the sand. And if this property is now selling under fair value, you know, hey, you've already got a bargain there.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. As mentioned, we do actually have our distressed property listings report on our website at sqmresearch.com.au. Louis also mentioned our automated valuation, so our AVM, which is called Property Explorer. Please visit that as well if you're looking to get either your current property valued or you're looking at any potential new properties that may be listed on our distressed property listings to get a valuation on that property. Look, thank you very much, and please follow us. I should also mention we do on our social media display distressed properties every week. I also do a little review of some of these distressed properties, so please check us out there. Thanks so much, and until next time.